Good afternoon. I call this meeting to order. Welcome to the fourth and final meeting of the Committee to Conduct an Interim Study concerning the use of the name, image, and likeness of a student athlete. Thanks to everyone who is attending in person here in Carson City and in Las Vegas, and for those who are joining us online from wherever you are. We greatly appreciate everyone's participation. We'll go ahead and move forward with taking the roll. Secretary, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Irvin,
Present here in Las Vegas, thank you.
Mr. Nepomuceno,
Here.
Vice Chair Lang,
Here.
Ms. Garza, Mr. Lee, Ms. Norris,
Here.
Ms. Caserto,
Present.
and Chair Miller.
All right, thank you. And let's mark Ms. Linda Garza and Devontae Smith as absent excused. We have a quorum, and I would like to welcome to our team, to our family here, Ms. Tarina Caserto to the committee. Welcome. She was designated by the Nevada System of Higher Education to represent them, and the Joint Interim Standing Committee on Education appointed her to the committee on June 15, 2022. This is officially Ms. Caserto's first meeting as a member, although she also tuned into our May meeting, but she wasn't an official member at that time. So we want to welcome you and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Chair, for the welcome. I am happy to be here. Yes, I tuned into that May meeting, but I have also reviewed all of the video and meeting minutes from the prior meetings too.
Awesome. Thank you. She's doing her homework, y'all, just in time. So perfect. Thank you, Ms. Caserto. All right, so let's go over a little housekeeping. I would like to cover some housekeeping reminders for the members and anyone providing testimony today. Please set your electronic devices to the silent mode. When testifying, identify yourself for the record, first and last name, each time you speak. For those in person and on Zoom, please keep your microphones off or mute yourselves unless you are speaking. For members attending via Zoom, please keep your video turned on during the meeting to ensure we have a quorum. For presenters and others attending in person, please sign in at the table near the entrance at each location. Please sign in even if you do not plan to testify today. All materials received prior to the meeting have been uploaded to the committee's webpage. Today's agenda includes the committee's final work session. As a reminder to members to help maintain the flow of the meeting and ensure everyone has a chance to speak, especially since we have members in multiple locations, please wait to be called upon if you would like to speak. I will recognize members one at a time if they wish to make any comments. Now, for those of you down in Las Vegas, since we don't have any staff sitting right next to you, if you have a question or a comment, I see your hands, Mr. Irvin, but just, I may not be able to see that while we're speaking. So if you just pop your mic on and just say you have a question, and we'll acknowledge you in the best order that we can if necessary. But just wanted to give you all the freedom to do that so we don't miss any important questions or comments that you all may have. Now let's move on to agenda item 2, public comment. Since we will be having a work session today, I encourage individuals to address any item in the work session during the first public comment period. If you are here to support or oppose any of the recommendations, or if you only wish to comment on them, this is the time set aside for you to come forward. Public comment may be provided in several different ways, all of which are listed on the agenda. You may provide public comment by testifying in person in Las Vegas or in Carson City by calling 669-900-6833, then entering meeting ID 879-8622-0392 and pressing pound. By emailing comments to studentathlete@lcb.state.nv.us and by mailing written comments to our research division at 401 South Carson Street, Carson City, Nevada 89701. You can also fax your comments to 775-684-6400. LCB's Broadcast and Production Services staff will interact with those making remote public comment and providing testimony to facilitate participation in the meeting. Public comment will be limited to 3 minutes per speaker, and additional opportunity to make public comment will be available at the end of the meeting. To give anyone calling in time to get in the queue, I would like to first begin with any public comment here in Carson City. If you would like to make comment here in Carson City, please approach the desk here. All right, seeing that we have no one here, do we have anyone in Carson City? And Mr. Irvin, I'll just lean on your eyes there to let me know if we have anyone, in Las Vegas.
No one here, sir.
Perfect, thank you. All right. So, do we have anyone wishing to provide public comment on the phone? So let's go to BPS staff and see if we have any callers calling into the meeting.
Thank you, Chair. The public line is open and working. However, there are no callers wishing to offer public comment at this time.
Perfect. And I do not believe we have anyone for public comment on Zoom. Just want to make sure that's correct. Yes. Perfect. We only have members on Zoom, right? Perfect. All right. Let's move on to agenda item 3, approval of minutes for the meetings on April 28th, 2022 and May 26th, 2022. Members, at this time, the committee will only be approving the minutes for the April 28th meeting. The May 26th meeting minutes are not ready for review or approval yet. So at this time, I will take a motion to approve the minutes for the April 28th, 2022 meeting.
So moved, Chair.
I have a chair from, I have a motion from Vice Chair. Do I have a second?
Second.
And that was
Eric Nepomuceno.
Mr. Nakamuseno. Did I say it correctly this time? I tried.
Sure. You got it.
He said, sure. That's an almost. He was like, that's a good, valiant effort. But you didn't quite make it. It's okay. I'm going to figure it out. Okay. Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I will ask our committee secretary to take the roll call vote, please.
Ms. Caserto,
Yes.
Ms. Garza, Mr. Irvin,
Yes.
Mr. Lee, Mr. Nepomuceno,
Yes.
Ms. Norris,
Yes.
Vice Chair Lang,
Yes.
and Chair Miller.
And I'm a yes. The minutes are approved. All right, we're going to move on to agenda item 4, which is our work session. Committee, there are 5 items in the work session document. Staff will guide us through each of these items, and if you are so inclined, I will accept a motion to approve an item, and then we can discuss it. Because we have some members online and others in Las Vegas and in Carson, I will ask that the committee secretary take a roll call vote for each recommendation. The recommendations currently outlined in the document are not necessarily set in stone. If the committee is so inclined, recommendations may be amended prior to the vote. If there are any proposed amendments to the recommendations, please wait until I call on you during the discussion period of each of them. So, are there any questions before we begin? All right, seeing none, I will turn things over to Ms. Sturm to begin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jen Sturm, Committee Policy Analyst with the Legislative Council Bureau's Research Division. And as nonpartisan staff, I can neither support nor oppose any proposal that comes before the legislature. So everyone should have the work session document in front of them. There are copies at both locations, and it has been posted as an exhibit to the committee's website under Agenda Item 4. Members will find it in their packets as well. The work session document was prepared by the chair and staff of the committee to conduct an interim study concerning the use of the name, image, and likeness of a student athlete. The document will assist the committee in determining which legislative measures and other actions it will request the Joint Interim Standing Committee on Education to consider for the 2023 session of the Nevada Legislature. This work session document contains a summary of recommendations presented during public hearings, through communication with individual committee members, or through correspondence submitted to the committee members or staff. The proposals listed in the document are organized so that the committee members can review them and decide whether they want to accept, reject, modify, or take no action on the recommendations. Pursuant to AB 254, this committee is tasked with studying and examining existing bylaws of athletic associations and state and federal laws relating to compensating a student athlete for the use of the NIL, or name, image, and likeness, of the student athlete. The Committee on Education is then tasked with submitting a report of the results of the study, including any recommendations for legislation, to the Director of the Legislative Counsel Bureau for transmission to the 2023 session of the Nevada Legislature. As such, following approval by this committee, certain recommendations will be presented to the Committee on Education. The Committee on Education may discuss those recommendations during its work session. Committee members are advised that LCB staff, at the direction of the chair, may coordinate with interested parties to obtain additional information for drafting purposes or for information to be included in the committee's final report. And with that, Mr. Chair, unless the committee members have any questions, I will begin with the first recommendation.
All right, thank you, Ms. Sturm. Do we have any questions? All right, seeing none, Ms. Sturm, you can continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jen Sturm, Committee Policy Analyst. So I'll walk the committee through the various recommendations, and then the chair will take over from there, requesting the committee's direction. So beginning on page 2 of the packet, the first recommendation, A1, focuses on national name, image, and likeness policy. The recommendation is to send a letter to Nevada's congressional delegation on behalf of the committee, encouraging the development of a national uniform policy for NIL, or name, image, and likeness. The committee heard from multiple presenters that without federal legislation, disparity among states' legislation has emerged, which has impacted recruitment and retention efforts. This letter responds to those disparities by encouraging Nevada's congressional delegation to create and support a federal policy that outlines specific parameters for NIL deals and policies across all states, including the role that individual institutions should play in monitoring and supporting NIL policies. Further, the letter will include that this national policy should develop a plan for international students to participate in NIL by addressing their visa complications, such as the work restrictions in place for F1 visa status. Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Sturm. Is there a motion to approve recommendation A1?
So moved, Chair.
I have a motion from Vice Chair Lang. Do we have a second?
Dexter Irvin, second.
Thank you, Mr. Irvin. I have a second from Mr. Dexter Irvin. Is there any discussion on the motion? All right, seeing none, will the committee secretary please take the roll call vote, please?
Ms. Caserto,
Yes.
Mr. Irvin,
Yes.
Mr. Nepomuceno,
Yes.
Ms. Norris,
Yes.
Vice Chair Lang,
Yes.
and Chair Miller.
Yes, and the motion carries. Ms. Sturm, please provide the next recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jen Sturm for the record. The next recommendation is item B2, which is to send a letter to the Nevada System of Higher Education on behalf of the Committee on Education, urging NSHE to conduct a study concerning NIL policies and challenges specific to junior colleges. Specifically, this study should investigate NIL issues relating but not limited to resources and personnel at junior colleges and funding opportunities for NIL deals for junior college student athletes. Testimony presented to the committee indicated that student-athlete transfer policies, especially concerning NIL, can be contradictory and difficult between junior colleges and other institutions. As such, the study should also investigate concerns and challenges with student-athlete transfers between 2- and 4-year colleges and universities. The item also outlines reporting recommendations if such a study is conducted. Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Sturham. I am going to see if we have any questions or comments or discussion on this item before we move for a motion. Ms. Caserto, go ahead.
Tarina Caserto for the record. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to make a motion to modify this recommendation and a rationale for that, please.
Okay, I think let's hear the rationale before we
Sure.
get to the motion part.
Absolutely. What we're looking at through leadership, I talked with leadership at the system level. With this particular recommendation, it seems most appropriate to urge and request our national, either the NJCAA or even possibly the NCAA in conjunction to conduct a study of this magnitude instead of bringing it to the system level where our resources, where we have more limited resources, along with not having the scope in such a small system in our state. We only have 4 2-year institutions, and of those 4 institutions, we only have 2 with athletic programs. However, we're very sensitive because after listening to the meeting audio and video of this committee, the last 3 meetings, member Dexter Irvin brought up some very good points, and we're very sensitive to there will be some impact to our 2-year colleges nationally with legislation that's happening. So fully support that a study needs to be conducted, but if we look back and urge and encourage the NCLS or the NJCAA to take a look at this and to further their research by putting a committee together for a formal study, we feel is most appropriate.
Okay, thank you. We have any other discussion there?
Chair,
Okay, we'll go with
Dexter Irvin.
We'll go with Mr. Irvin, and then we'll come to you, Vice Chair.
Thank you. Dexter Irvin for the record, Athletic Director at CSN. My concern with that, with your thought process there is the same one that exists with the NCAA right now, is that I believe that the NJCAA will defer that back to the states and or to the national policy. They are all very hesitant to do anything but broad general review like they currently have because of all the different state policies and state laws. So even our recommendation, quite frankly, I'm afraid would fall on deaf ears. And even though we have 2 community colleges, junior colleges in the state that have athletics, it would really be helpful to have some guidance from our own state as to how the junior colleges fit into this relative to our state environment. This last night driving home, I listened to two local high schools that were running tournaments to develop NIL deals for their athletes that graduated from their high schools. So they were actually raising money to provide NIL deals for these high school students that are going to different institutions. So it's beginning to permeate way beyond the NCAA level. We are not going to get direction, I'm afraid, from the NJCAA, similar to what we've experienced with the national office. And so, quite frankly, we've been looking to the state, and I can understand the hesitancy with limited resources and the number of students, but quite frankly, we only have two institutions in the state that are Division I. We have the same number that are junior college. And so I would hope that we would be able to maybe look at some resources that could provide some direction and help us establish some policies for our community and junior colleges in the state. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Irving. Vice Chair?
Thank you, Chair. I agree with Mr. Irvin. I think that our committee was tasked with coming up with recommendations, and therefore, because we passed a law in the legislature for this committee to do that. And so I think that the onus is on us to provide a vehicle for which we can make our own decisions about what happens in Nevada. And I can appreciate that looking at something from a national level, I think that's important. But it feels like to me in all the presentations that we've had, that the onus has come back to the states. They want the states to make these decisions, and it's not going to be a national thing. And until it is, I think we have to come up with our own guidelines. And having two institutions, junior colleges here, that have athletic programs, let's do the best we can for them and make guidelines for them and have a study so that we can figure out how we can best help them. And so I would actually like to keep the language like we have it, and create the committee, do the work, and have them bring it to the next legislature. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Vice Chair. And is there anyone else that would like to make a comment? Okay. And I do just want to remind everyone that this is a recommendation to the Education Committee to send a letter urging or requesting it. So it's not a forced thing. There's still room to work it out. Just want to be clear on that. Well, go ahead.
Tarina Caserto for the record. I want to recognize the comments of both the Vice Chair and Member Irvin with their concerns. What I heard when I listened to those last three meetings was that we do need to encourage the national level, and I think we need to push for that. I think a study currently at our state level through the Nevada System of Higher Education is premature. What I heard NJCAA talk about was we're in the infancy of this. They do not have the recommendations yet. There's things that are fast moving. And so those would be the same challenges I think that we would encounter. Not only that, but making a recommendation to put together a comprehensive study such as this is going to fall within the priorities of the Nevada System of Higher Education. And I can say that we've got some very large studies coming forward in the next biennium, so everything will have to be prioritized. So as to not waste time sending a letter to these national entities, agencies, encouraging them, hopefully we'd be able to get other states to do the same. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Caserto. I'll pose this to the committee. I think that we can potentially send a letter to both. We can send a letter to NSHE as well as the national organizations. And if we are on board with that, I would like to take a motion to move forward with that. And I will, Ms. Caserto, if that would satisfy you, I take the motion from you. Otherwise, you let me know.
Tarina Caserto for the record. I will not make that motion.
No problem. Is there someone who would like to make that motion? Maybe Mr. Irvin?
I guess yes, Dexter Irvin for the record. I'm wondering if, as you suggested, Chair, that we can incorporate both of those concepts in the motion, that obviously we encourage our state to act as well as the national offices. Just, I guess I'm a little cynical. I don't see our national offices responding to this at all. And so I'm wondering if we don't respond to that as a state, where do we fall? Because they have shown no tendency. Quite frankly, the junior colleges are going to follow the lead of the NCAA, and they have not shown a desire or a tendency to have a national policy either. And so I just don't see them acting on that. And we send a request for them to do it, and then when nothing happens, then what are we left with? I guess is what the questions I have. So how do we then get our state to address? I agree with Ms. Concerta. I don't see that we necessarily have to have a full-blown study just separately for junior colleges. But I also think that we need to find a way to address that within our state. And so, perhaps it's a broader issue, Chair, because quite frankly, we've adapted all of our athletic policies in the state based upon the Division I institutions. And I understand why we did that, because quite frankly, we really didn't plan for junior college athletics in the state like some others have done. And so like I think I told you guys the first meeting, my contract has the same number of pages as the Division I athletic directors. And so it doesn't, sometimes those things don't quite fit. And so perhaps we need to, I don't know if there's another pathway for our state to look at how we address this with junior colleges rather than a full-blown study. If there is, I would be in favor of that. I am not opposed to sending a letter to the national people. I just don't believe that they will act on anything. You won't see any action. You get a nice letter back, but we're not going to see anything different.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Irvin. I just want to remind everybody again, this is a recommendation to the Education Committee to send a letter to urge some type of study or movement. So it could go to both. It could go to one. It may be more robust if we just go ahead and send it to both. But with that thought, I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to Vice Chair Lang.
Thank you, Chair. I just have a quick question. So if what I'm hearing is that Inchi has a very full plate, and adding this to their plate, it would probably get pushed to the bottom. Would that be? And so if that's the case, my question then maybe is to Ms. Sturm, if Inchi didn't feel like this was something they could deal with, is there another place that we could place this study? Is another entity?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Jen Sturm, Committee Policy Analyst. I say, in that case, you might, a consideration would be to task the next interim, committee on education or another, committee to study that topic. But I don't know if, our committee council has anything to add to that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Asher Killian, Committee Council. Yeah, certainly the legislature could assign this as a follow-up study to a different interim committee next interim. The legislature or the recommendation from this committee could be that the legislature will instead assign this study to some other state agency. The legislature could decide to assign it to INCHI or could decide to assign it to some other entity that might be appropriate. I don't know what other state agencies would really have the expertise to do this kind of study outside of INCHI, but the legislature would have freedom to assign it to any body of the state government as needed.
So then would it be appropriate in the recommendation because I know we mentioned INCHI in the recommendation, that we could say something more like could be assigned to I just want to make it more open-ended, so it wouldn't be stuck in one entity, that it could be open to other entities.
Vice Chair, so are you suggesting something like to an entity? So it becomes a recommendation to the legislature to assign the study to a state agency? Is that what I'm
Well,
understanding?
I think I think I would like to have that as an option, because if and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like NG their plate is too full to be able to handle this. But I think it's really important that it get handled, and it's like Mr. Urban said, well, we only have two schools. We have two schools, two four-year colleges too with athletic programs. So we're dealing with the same kinds of issues. And I just think that we need to look at our junior colleges and give them the attention that is needed on this issue. Because I agree with him, it is expanding and it's going to be in the high schools before we know it. So if you can craft a motion that includes that, I would move that.
Okay, so this is what the geniuses here at LCB have come up with, who I appreciate so much. The staff team here is amazing. So we can make the motion, we can amend it to make the motion so that the Education Committee makes the decision on on where to place the study. So we're essentially urging or recommending the Education Committee to assign the study, if they so choose to do the study, to assign the study to the entity that they deem appropriate at that time. Does that make sense? I didn't articulate it as well as Mr. Asher did.
Yes, that makes perfect sense. And I think one of the things that's going on here is that we haven't figured out what the scope of what the committee's going to do. So it may take one day, it may take 2 hours, it may take 3 days. I mean, we just don't know. And so we're thinking big right now because we know how studies are sometimes, but it may be actually small. And so, I think giving it to education would be the appropriate spot, and I would move that motion.
Okay, thank you. So we have a motion on the table to amend the language to be a recommendation to the Education Committee to assign the study to the appropriate agency at the time that they decide to do so. Do I have a second on that?
Caserto, second.
And I have a second from Ms. Caserto. Do we have any further discussion on these motions? Seeing none, I'll ask the secretary to take the roll.
Ms. Caserto,
Yes.
Mr. Irvin,
Yes.
Mr. Nepomuceno,
Yes.
Ms. Norris,
Yes.
Vice Chair Lang,
Yes.
and Chair Miller.
I am a yes, and that motion carries. Thank you all. Ms. Sturm, can we go on to the next recommendation, please?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Jen Sturm, Committee Policy Analyst. Going on to page 3 of the work session document, the next recommendation includes NIL best practices. Recommendation C3 is to include a list of best NIL practices in the committee's final report. This list may include, but is not limited to, the following. A, awareness and communication of state and federal NIL parameters for on-campus NIL practitioners, including student athletes, coaches, and institutional personnel, should be increased. B, student athletes may not attend NIL engagements in lieu of academic or athletic activities. C, student athletes must wear and use institutionally issued gear and equipment during athletic activities. D, use of an institution's logos, marks, or facilities for NIL engagements must be approved in writing by an institution. E, NIL activities must be consistent with institutional and NSHE policies, the Student-Athlete Handbook, local, state, or federal law, and existing National Collegiate Athletic Association regulations. And F, NIL educational supports for student athletes in areas including, but not limited to, financial implications, tax education, and scholarship impacts should be further developed. Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Sturm. Do we have any questions or discussion on item C3? All right, seeing none, do I have a motion from someone? I'll accept the motion to approve.
For the record, Eric Nepomuceno, motion to approve.
Thank you, Mr. Nepomuceno. And do I have a second?
Second.
And that was a second from Vice Chair Lang. Any further discussion on the motion? All right, seeing none, will the committee secretary please call the roll call vote, please?
Ms. Caserto,
Yes.
Mr. Irvin,
Yes.
Mr. Nepomuceno,
Yes.
Ms. Norris,
Yes.
Vice Chair Lang,
Yes.
and Chair Miller.
Yes, the motion carries. Ms. Sturm, will you please provide the next recommendation?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jen Sturm, Committee Policy Analyst. The next recommendation is D4, which is to send a letter to the Nevada Gaming Control Board and the Nevada Gaming Commission on behalf of the Committee on Education, urging the board or commission to conduct a study concerning NIL implications for the gaming industry in Nevada. Specifically, this study may investigate what, if any, possibilities exist for NIL deals between student athletes and the gaming industry. The study may also investigate the possibility of deals with student athletes as brand agents, among other deals, and the implications of such deals. The item also outlines reporting recommendations if such a study is conducted. Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Sturm. All right, are there any questions or discussion on item D4? All right, seeing none, is there a motion to approve item D4?
So moved, Chair.
I have a motion from Vice Chair Lang. Do I have a second?
Dexter Irvin, second.
Thank you, Mr. Irvin. I have a second from Mr. Dexter Irvin. Will the committee secretary please take the roll call vote, please?
Ms. Caserto,
Yes.
Mr. Irvin,
Yes.
Mr. Nepomuceno,
Yes.
Ms. Norris,
Yes.
Vice Chair Lang,
Yes.
and Chair Miller.
Yes, that motion carries. Ms. Durham, please provide the next recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jen Sturm for the record. We are on our final recommendation, recommendation E5, which is to propose legislation to amend the Nevada revised statutes regarding student-athlete disclosures to instead require any entity which engages in an NIL deal with a student-athlete to be responsible for disclosing that deal to the student-athlete's institution. The institution should then report NIL deals to NSHE. Further, the proposed legislation would require any entity who facilitates NIL deals, including but not limited to third-party agents such as collectives, boosters, and certain vendors, to register with the state through the Office of the Secretary of the State. Collectives in particular are required to disclose all participating parties as well as sources and recipients of the collective's funds. Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Durham. Do I have any questions or comments on the recommendation item E5? All right, seeing none, is there a motion to
Chair,
approve?
excuse me.
I'm sorry. Okay, go ahead.
Sorry. And I don't know if we do this or not, is there a proposed effective date for this recommendation? In other words, is it just in the future? Is it I'm not certain how that works, where that would become effective if in fact that's what happened.
Mr. Killian, would you like to answer that, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Asher Killian, Committee Counsel. So within this recommendation text itself, there is no recommended effective date for the ultimate legislation that would make this change. What's being recommended here is that this committee is recommending to the Committee on Education that it submit a bill draft for the upcoming legislative session that would contain these requirements. So ultimately, that legislation would be considered by the 2023 regular session of the legislature. If there's a particular effective date for these substantive provisions that the committee wishes to recommend, it could include that within this recommendation. But as of right now, there is no particular effective date for the ultimate legislation that's being recommended, if that recommendation is then accepted by the Committee on Education and turned into a bill draft request for the 2023 legislative session.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other?
I have a comment, Chair.
Go ahead.
Eric Nepomuceno for the record. I just wanted to talk through the recommendation as it pertains to the application of the actual recommendation. So one of the things we discussed a little earlier on was the fact that NSHE is stretched at this point, but this recommendation looks to include them in terms of disclosure. A lot of moving parts there in terms of, well, ultimately, what will they be doing with the contracts? And then are they going to be an enforcing entity, assuming contracts don't make their way not only to NSHE, but to the institution? Also, in terms of third-party agents registering with the Office of the State or the Secretary of the State, my concern there is, does this put our student athletes in a position where it could limit their opportunity, where they have groups that say, you know what, we can't handle doing all this paperwork because we just want to pay you for an hour appearance. And if there isn't a path of least resistance, and these are all requirements, then we can't work with you or the institution. I have seen that on a much smaller scale, so I just wanted to share my experience with the application of some of the NIL deals that we've been dealing with. And then finally, I would like to just share what I've seen from student athletes' perspectives in terms of disclosure. Some of them appreciate disclosure and want to track numbers because they use that to help increase their value and their brand. Others don't want any of their deals out there, some for negotiation reasons, leverage reasons, and some just for privacy reasons. Although I appreciate that something should be done with respect to disclosure, my humble opinion is we want to do less with disclosure and not more with disclosure in terms of creating parameters that could prevent NIL deals and not support our student athletes taking advantage of all opportunities that could be presented to them.
Thank you, Vice Chair.
Chair, I'm wondering if, I know we had discussed this privately, you and I, about putting an amount in there, like you'd have to disclose if it was over a certain amount. And I'm wondering because I think that if we get into, you have to disclose if someone appears for an hour and they make X amount of dollars, do they have to disclose that, or are we just looking for the big NIL deals over a certain amount? And so I'm wondering if the committee is amenable to putting in an amount in that language of where you'd need to disclose and register with the Secretary of State. Would that help solve the angst that we have about this?
Thank you, Vice Chair. Yes, we did speak about that, and so I'm open to that. But to answer a couple of your questions, Mr. Nepomuceno, the suggestion that they register with the Secretary of State is about the business of the state. And if they are going to do business in our state with our athletes, we would like them, I think, ideally to be registered. There is already disclosure in place. The disclosure right now falls on the responsibility of the athlete. So the thought here was to move that disclosure to the entity, as they would probably keep a tighter and a better record, and be able to turn that over more quickly or to report it more easily and accurately. The other, I think, thought there was those reports should still go in the same way as the student's report. So it just would shift from the student doing it to the entity doing it. And I believe that we can probably incorporate some language that minimizes the type of reporting that's actually done. But something that we talked about, Vice Chair Lang and I talked about, was requiring that only that disclosure if it was a plus $10,000 deal or something like that. So it wasn't a lot of the deals than the things that we were hearing a lot of the students are getting right now. But if it got into more larger amounts of money, then, we'd want to know, we want to track that a bit to some degree. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I think Eric Nepomuceno, for the record, I do agree with that statement in terms of creating some sort of monetary figure that would trigger the disclosure. A lot of what we're seeing right now are, $25 for a birthday appearance. And so I just wouldn't want those opportunities to go away because you don't have a third-party entity. You have a father who's an avid sports fan and just wants a student athlete to attend their son's birthday party. And if they need to register with the secretary and have all these hoops and hurdles, I can see those types of opportunities going away.
So, Mr. Nepomuceno, would you like to make a motion that we include a dollar amount before disclosure is necessary?
Yes, I would.
Okay,
And
go
I
ahead.
would defer, because I think, I'm sorry, I would defer, obviously. I think that dollar amount should be tied somehow, perhaps to some sort of tax implication. You know, like I guess the number figure should be calculated in terms of why we chose such a dollar amount. So I think the 10,000, the 5-figure threshold is certainly something that came to my mind in terms of that's material money that a student athlete would be receiving. And if I saw that, regardless of whether or not that was in legislation, I would look into why was that value so high, and then also quid pro quo, was the service being provided in return? Could that justify that figure? Because that's exactly what the NCAA is looking at right now. They're trying to figure out what deals are actually offers and inducements versus legitimate NIL deals.
Okay. Mr. Nepomuceno, if you would like to just go ahead and make that motion, and you can make it, you can include a specific dollar amount, or you can open it to the Education Committee if they move forward with a BDR to establish that dollar amount. But if you go ahead and make the motion, then we'll move forward. I think we're all on the same page about that at this moment.
Great. I will, Eric Nepomuceno, for the record, like to make a motion to include a dollar amount in our recommendation E. And that dollar amount could be $10,000 or something that the Education Committee sees as a better fit for that particular recommendation.
All right. I have a motion to approve E5 as amended by Mr. Nepomuceno. Do I have a second?
Chair,
Yes, sir.
Dexter Irvin, I am concerned about the line that ask us to report to INSHE and what function that serves, and where is that in the process, and how does that facilitate the completion of these contracts? What would be the function of reporting these to INSHE? And who's going to oversee that?
So the
How does it come back out of that once we report to INSHE?
Okay, thank you. Ms. Vice Chair, did you have something there? No? Okay. So the, and maybe you all can run us through this one more time now, how the current disclosure reporting process goes. Mr. Nepomuceno or Mr. Irvin, if you can explain that one more time, please.
Sure, Eric Nepomuceno, for the record. So currently the disclosure process works. Our institution has a third-party administrator called NoCap, and that's intentional. We don't want to be the custodian of the contracts, if you will, because as you can only imagine, it's a whole nother process in itself. Our student athletes can engage in deals outside of NoCap, which is also a marketplace, or within NoCap. And then the responsibility is the student athletes to make sure that they're tracking down the contracts that need to be uploaded into that software. And then from an institution standpoint, we are not approving anything. We are acknowledging the fact that that contract is in the software, and then we're reviewing it to make sure that it's in line with institutional policy and then the NCAA interim policy, which essentially we're looking at pay for play as well as offers and inducements. So there is a custodian that is housing our current contracts. I think one of the issues that I believe we would experience if we need to then get contracts to NSHE, again, without knowing what the parameters are. Is there going to be a deadline? What is the penalty? These are some of the things that we're just struggling with on campus right now because there isn't any type of guidance that we've been given. I just think that can create an extra layer of gray. And then to Mr. Irwin's point, what ultimately would they want to use that information for? Because then is it best served for us to then just put that report together if they're looking to track the number of deals or the amount as opposed to disclosing every single contract? Could we just give them the information that they're actually looking for?
Thank you. Ms. Caserto, you have a comment?
Tarina Caserto, for the record. Thank you. I appreciate these gentlemen bringing this to our attention. I am not sure that at this point we need to collect that information from institutions. In the future, this may be information we may want to look at. We may ask for them to report. We could figure out the parameters if the Board of Regents wants to look at this in the future. But at this point, it does not appear, though, it's necessary to report these pieces to Nevada System of Higher Education.
Okay, thank you. So what I understand what everyone is saying. I think that what we can potentially do is the goal here was to actually capture the information that is now already required to be reported in a centralized place. It is still early. This is a recommendation. So what I'm proposing is that we, that again, this be something that the Education Committee considers in reviewing the best way to capture the information and what information from the disclosure. So it may be at a future time. I know we're very early in this process of the name, image, and likeness of our student athletes. And so we are trying to get a broad jump and some recommendations in place that as things progress forward, we kind of have an idea of how we should move. So with the disclosure requirement, the goal, again, is to remove the responsibility from the student to the entity, but also to capture the necessary information that we need to capture to, further understand what's happening, know when things are not happening as they should so that we can protect our students and our institutions. So I'm going to suggest that this disclosure, that in this particular item, in this BDR, that that Education Committee, should they choose to bring this disclosure requirement BDR forward, that they decide again what agency or what should be done with disclosures. It may be just a conversation that needs further discussion as a whole. So does that make sense to everyone? Does that work? Any thoughts?
Chair Dexter Irvin.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
I agree with what you're saying. We currently do our annual reports that we provide to the Board of Regents and to NSHE every year. That information could be given to them as they require in our annual reports without having another report or approval that would go to NSHE at a separate time. So I think that NSHE has it within the realm of their responsibility to ask us for that report as part of our annual report already, and we can provide that information. The way this reads to me is that we have to report these deals to NSHE and get their permission before they can go forward. Is that the intent or not the intent?
No, that is not the intent.
Okay.
So with that being said, I think that what you said can work. Ms. Caserto, do you have any thoughts on that?
Caserto, for the record, I agree with Member Irvin in that Nevada System of Higher Education could determine if or when or how they want that reported. Down the road, we could do it that way. That's correct. I mean, I agree with that. I am concerned with the language, and I do appreciate his question to clarify what the intent was, because I believe the way this is written, it could be misconstrued. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So that we are clear, the intent is not for NSHE to have an approval. It is simply for the information to be reported, collected. And so with that, Mr. Nepomuceno, does some of that meet your concerns?
Yes, it does. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, great. So I'm going to try to get this together in my head here. I would like to entertain a motion amending the current language to reflect that NSHE does not have an approval, that they are only to receive the information, and that information can be, they can determine when that information and how that information is reported. And I would accept a motion on that, and I would like to invite Mr. Nepomuceno to make that motion.
Thank you, Chair. Eric Nepomuceno for the record, and I would like to make a motion to remove the requirement to report all NIL deals from the institution to NSHE and amend that to have NSHE request a report at their discretion, requiring whatever information at the appropriate time from institutions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Nepomuceno. I'm actually, we'll make sure that we get all of the pieces of the amended language in here. So I'm going to ask our legal, Mr. Killian, to clarify, to clean it up for us so that we make sure we're all on the same page about what's happening.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Asher Killian, Committee Counsel. So my understanding is that the motion regarding item E5 would be to take the text as written in the work session document, amend that first concept, which is the idea that the third parties, rather than the students, should be disclosing these deals to apply only over a certain dollar amount, which would be either $10,000 or whatever other amount the Committee on Education determines to be appropriate. And then second, to amend that next idea in the item that the institution should report NIL deals to NSHE, to instead provide explicitly that NSHE should not have approval authority over NIL deals, but rather the Committee on Education should determine the appropriate method to gather information relating to the NIL deals into one centralized place. And if I did not capture the intent of either of those, please correct me. I think that's my best understanding of what's been discussed so far as applying in a single motion.
Okay. Are we all there? Can I get a so moved from somebody? You don't have to repeat it. Just give me a so moved and we're good to go. Mr. Nepomuceno.
So moved.
Thank you. And can I get a second?
Second.
And we have a second from Vice Chair Lang. We've had all the discussion we're going to have today on this motion. So will the committee secretary please take a roll call vote?
Ms. Caserto,
Yes.
Mr. Irvin,
Yes.
Mr. Nepomuceno,
Yes.
Ms. Norris,
Yes.
Vice Chair Lang,
Yes.
and Chair Miller.
And I'm a yes, and that motion carries. And we have made it to the end of our recommendations to our work session. The next agenda item is agenda item 5, which is public comment. This is our second round of public comment. Now, if you are listening online and would like to provide public comment, please call 669-900-6833 and then enter the meeting ID 879-8622-0392 and press pound. To allow time for people to call in under public comment, we are going to begin with public comment here in Carson City. There is no one in the room, so we will move on to Las Vegas. And what they're showing me on the screen looks like there's no one in the room. Mr. Irvin, I'll ask you to confirm that for me.
That is confirmed, Chair. There is not anyone here.
Thank you. Now let's go to callers. Anyone, BPS staff, do we have anyone on the line that would like to make public comment?
Thank you, Chair. Again, the public line is open and working. However, there are no callers wishing to offer public comment at this time.
Okay. Next, we are going to move to Zoom. I'm going to ask Ms. Lang, Vice Chair Lang, I'm sorry, if she'd like to make a comment.
I would, thank you. I would just like to thank you, Chair, for your leadership in this committee. This was something new for all of us, even though we had seen a lot in the media. And we are all just trying to do, excuse me, do the right thing for Nevada and our athletes. And so I just wanted to thank you and our staff and the members of the committee for and our student athletes. It was so important to have the students here, and hopefully we can this will move us in the right direction and not constrict our athletes, but offer them and the schools opportunities.
Well, thank you so very much, Vice Chair. It was a pleasure to have you on board with me and to support this work, this effort, as well as the team. Our staff has been amazing, our LCV staff and our committee members. I want to thank you all, our stakeholders and presenters, everyone who gave their time, their talent, their thoughts, their presence, their expertise. It was extremely valuable as we traverse very new ground, new territory. We're a state that leads in a lot of areas, and I don't see why this is an area we can't also lead in. So with that being said, thank you to our broadcast and production services, our fiscal, our legal, and our research divisions. It has been an honor and a privilege to serve as your chair. This is my first time. You guys made it great, and a distinct pleasure to work with everyone on this committee. Thank you again for your service. If you are interested, you are invited to monitor. Oh, love a script. Anyways, if you're interested, you are invited to monitor the Joint Interim Standing Committee on Education July 29th meeting. That is when these recommendations will officially be made to the Education Committee. The Committee on Education will hear this report of the committee's findings and recommendations at that time. An archived version of today's meeting will be available online, and I don't believe there's any further business to handle today. So you all enjoy your summer, the rest of it. Stay cool, stay hydrated, have fun, and we are adjourned.